The ballroom had fallen into chaos. Hundreds of guests, dressed in silks and diamonds, filled the air with restless murmurs. Glasses clinked, whispers echoed, and at the center of it all stood Grace Parker, the wedding planner, pale as marble. The band hadn't arrived. The bride was moments away from walking down the aisle, and there was no music, only panic. At the edge of the glittering hall, near the servants' entrance, Maria Ward clutched her cleaning rag and whispered a prayer under her breath. Her 12-year-old son, Eli, stood beside her, his eyes wide as the golden chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors. He could feel her fear even before she spoke it. "Don't move," she whispered. "Just stay out of sight." But Eli wasn't looking at the guests. He was looking at the grand stage, the empty chairs where musicians should have been, and the lone microphone standing in silence. Then came the voice of William Montgomery, the billionaire father of the bride, booming through the room. "Unacceptable. I will not have silence at my daughter's wedding." Grace stammered something about traffic. Excuses drowned in his fury, and in that moment, when pride met desperation, Eli stepped forward. He walked past the shocked waiters, past his trembling mother, his small hand reaching into his pocket. From it, he pulled a worn silver harmonica, its metal dulled from years of playing in secret. The crowd turned, laughter rippled among the wealthy. But then Eli took a breath, and when the first note left the harmonica, soft, trembling, pure, the entire room went still. The sound rose and filled the silence like light breaking through storm clouds. And for the first time that night, the billionaire's palace fell quiet, not from failure, but from awe. Before we continue this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always heartwarming to know how far our stories travel. Stay with us until the end, because what happens after Eli plays that first note will move you in ways you won't expect. The day had started like any other workday for Maria Ward. She'd pressed her uniform, tied her hair neatly, and reminded her son Eli to wait quietly while she finished her chores at the Montgomery estate. The mansion buzzed with activity. Flowers arriving, chefs shouting, and guests in shimmering gowns. It was the wedding of the year. The billionaire William Montgomery's only daughter, Charlotte, was marrying into another powerful family. Everything had to be perfect. But beneath all the glitter and champagne, there was exhaustion, tension, and a secret. Eli, the quiet boy sitting in the servants' quarters, had brought his old harmonica with him, the one he'd found years ago and taught himself to play. For him, it wasn't an instrument, it was a voice. He didn't know that by the end of the day, that voice would rise above the noise of wealth, pride, and fear, and change everything. The sun rose over the Montgomery estate in a golden haze, spilling across the manicured gardens and white silk tents that had been built overnight. From the outside, everything looked perfect, like a painting of wealth and grace. But inside, the mansion was already vibrating with tension. Maria Ward moved swiftly through the marble halls, her uniform crisp and her hair pulled into its usual bun. The morning staff had been doubled for the occasion, servers, decorators, florists, all under pressure to meet the impossible standards of William Montgomery. She'd seen dozens of events in her 16 years of work there, but this one was different. This wasn't just a celebration, it was a performance. "Maria!" called Grace Parker, the wedding planner, her voice sharp over the chaos. "The silverware isn't aligned on table 6. Please fix it before the guests arrive." Maria smiled politely, nodding. "Of course, Miss Parker." Grace barely noticed her reply before rushing off to handle another disaster. In the corner of the room, Eli sat quietly, a small lunch bag beside him. He wasn't supposed to be here today, not officially. But Maria didn't have anyone to watch him, and she trusted him to stay invisible. He knew the rules. Don't talk, don't touch, don't get noticed. From his seat near the servants' entrance, Eli watched the endless dance of luxury unfold. Men shouting instructions, women carrying flowers worth more than his family earned in a month. He didn't belong in this world, but it fascinated him all the same. When the kitchen doors swung open, the smell of roasted meats and pastries filled the air. Eli's stomach growled softly. He reached for his lunch, but instead, his fingers brushed the cool metal of his harmonica. He hesitated, then pulled it out. It wasn't shiny anymore. The silver had dulled with time, the edges worn smooth. He'd found it 3 years ago behind the gardener's shed, half buried in dirt. It hadn't looked like much back then, But when he blew into it for the first time, something inside him had awakened, something that no lesson or book could have taught him. Now, he lifted it to his lips and played softly, almost inaudibly. A few quiet notes drifted into the air, hesitant, then smoother, fuller, alive. It wasn't a song for anyone else. It was just for him. But fate has a strange way of bending moments. The sound carried, through the kitchen door, across the corridor, and into the ears of someone who wasn't supposed to hear it. Charlotte Montgomery, the bride, stood at the far end of the hall, her wedding dress being adjusted by two stylists. She froze, her eyes lifting. "What is that sound?" she whispered. One of the stylists glanced around. "Sound, ma'am?" "That music." The notes faded as quickly as they came, replaced again by the noise of hurried footsteps. But Charlotte's heart fluttered. It was soft, imperfect, yet it had more soul than the rehearsed string quartets she'd been forced to sit through all week. Downstairs, Maria appeared in the doorway, her expression sharp. "Eli," she whispered urgently, "put that away. You can't play here." He lowered the harmonica immediately, guilt flashing in his eyes. "Sorry, Mama. I didn't think anyone could hear." Maria knelt in front of him, her voice gentle but firm. "You have a gift, baby. But not here. Not in this place. These people don't understand us. They'll laugh, and I won't let them hurt you." Eli nodded, slipping the harmonica back into his pocket. "I promise, Mama." She smiled faintly, brushing his cheek with her hand before hurrying off to fix the table settings. Eli sat back, trying to focus on his sandwich, but his heart still beat to the rhythm of the notes he hadn't finished playing. Hours passed. The sky brightened, and so did the tension. Guests began arriving in sleek cars and designer suits. Cameras flashed. Champagne flowed before noon. Every corner of the mansion gleamed under the weight of perfection, except for the stage, where the musicians were supposed to set up. Grace checked her watch for the 5th time, frowning. "They're late," she muttered. "Traffic, probably," said one of the assistants. "Traffic doesn't exist for professionals being paid this much," Grace snapped. Upstairs, Charlotte peeked through her window, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and dread. Her father's voice echoed from below, commanding, impatient, proud. "Everything must run on schedule," William barked at the staff. "If anyone makes a mistake, they'll never work in this city again." Eli flinched at the tone, his small hands tightening around his harmonica inside his pocket. Then came a scream from outside. Grace again, this time louder. The musicians, their van broke down an hour away. The panic rippled instantly. Maria felt her heart sink. She could already imagine the explosion of anger that would follow. Within seconds, William's voice thundered through the hall. "What do you mean they're not coming?" The guests began murmuring. Cameras turned toward the stage. The once perfect wedding now hung on a knife's edge. Maria stood frozen, clutching a napkin to her chest. She wanted to disappear. But then she looked toward her son, sitting quietly near the corner, his eyes drawn again to the empty stage. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. In his gaze, she saw something terrifying and beautiful all at once. Courage. "Eli," she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned to her, eyes wide but steady. Before she could stop him, the boy stood. And as the crowd whispered and the billionaire raged, Eli Ward, the maid's son, walked toward the stage that no one dared approach. And as silence fell over the hall, Maria realized her son was about to do something she had spent years teaching him not to. Be seen. The ballroom had never been this quiet. All the noise, laughter, and conversation that once filled the air now melted into uneasy silence as Eli Ward walked toward the stage. His shoes tapped lightly against the polished marble floor, a sound so small, yet somehow deafening. Dozens of eyes turned to follow him. Confusion rippled through the crowd. "Who's that boy?" someone whispered. "Isn't he one of the staff's kids?" murmured another. At the center of it all, William Montgomery stared, his jaw tightening. "What is this?" he barked. "Why is there a child walking toward my stage?" But Eli didn't stop. He climbed the short steps carefully, his small hands trembling as he reached the microphone stand. He didn't need to look around to know what people were thinking. He could feel it in the air, the weight of disbelief pressing down on him. From the corner of the hall, Maria stood frozen. Her heart pounded so fast she could barely breathe. She wanted to call him back, to protect him from the humiliation that was surely coming, but her voice wouldn't come. Grace Parker, the wedding planner, took a step forward, her clipboard trembling in her hand. "Sir, I can take care of this." But before she could move, Charlotte Montgomery, still in her wedding gown, spoke softly from the front row. "Let him try." The crowd turned. Even William hesitated. Charlotte's eyes didn't leave Eli. There was something in the boy's face, a calm determination, a courage that didn't belong to someone his age. William scoffed. "He's a child. This is not a charity event." Her tone didn't waver. "Then let this be the first thing today that isn't bought with money." A murmur spread through the room. Grace looked helplessly between them. William glared but said nothing. And just like that, Eli had permission to exist in a place that was never meant for him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his harmonica. It caught the light, dull silver, scratched, small enough to disappear in his hand. Someone in the crowd chuckled. "A harmonica at a wedding?" Another laughed softly. "Oh, this should be good." Eli's chest tightened, but he remembered his mother's voice in his head. "Keep your head high, my boy, even when they look down on you." He closed his eyes. The ballroom air felt heavy and cold. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the harmonica to his lips. For a moment, nothing happened. Just silence. A long, uncomfortable silence that stretched into eternity. Then, one note, soft, shaky, barely there. Then another, and another. Soon the sound began to bloom, pure and trembling, like the first rays of sunlight after a storm. The melody was simple, almost childlike at first, but it carried something the room hadn't felt all day. Sincerity. The guests, one by one, stopped whispering. Glasses were lowered. The chatter died completely. Eli's fingers moved instinctively, his body swaying slightly as the music grew deeper, warmer. He played as if the harmonica wasn't just an instrument, but a memory. Every note a fragment of something lost and found again. It wasn't a love song. It wasn't a waltz. It was a story. Of long days in silence, of watching his mother scrub floors while he dreamed of light. When he hit the final high note, even the chandeliers seemed to shimmer in time with the sound. And then, silence again. But this time it wasn't cold. It was reverent. For a moment, no one moved. Then from somewhere near the back, a single clap echoed. Then another, and another, until the room erupted in applause, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Eli opened his eyes, startled. His mother stood near the kitchen doors, her hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Charlotte Montgomery rose to her feet, clapping through her own tears. The groom, Thomas Blake, followed, smiling wide. Even Grace, who had spent the morning buried in panic, felt her throat tighten. "He saved it," she whispered to herself. The boy actually saved it. William Montgomery, however, remained seated. His eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. He wasn't moved. Not yet. To him, this was still a disruption, an accident, a moment he hadn't controlled. Eli lowered the harmonica and stepped back from the microphone. He wasn't sure what to do. Bow, leave, or just stand still. He'd never performed before. He hadn't done it for applause. He'd done it because there was nothing else he could do. Then, from the front row, Charlotte approached him. Her white dress trailed behind her like a whisper. She knelt down so her eyes met his. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Eli," he said, barely audible. "Eli." She smiled, her voice trembling. "Thank you for saving my wedding." The crowd laughed gently, this time with warmth. Eli blushed, lowering his gaze. "I just wanted to help." Before she could reply, a harsh voice cut through the moment. "That's enough." William had stood, his face stern. "This is a wedding, not a street performance. Thank you for your effort, but we'll handle the rest." The applause died instantly. Charlotte turned to her father. "Dad, not now," he snapped. "Grace, escort the boy and his mother out, please." Eli froze. Maria, still by the door, stepped forward quickly. "Sir, please, he didn't mean any harm, he only—" "I said enough," William barked. "This is not his place." The music that had just united the room now turned back into tension, sharp and painful. Eli looked down at the harmonica in his hand. For the first time, it didn't feel like his anymore. Maria reached him, her hand trembling as she touched his shoulder. "Come, baby. It's all right." But before they could leave, Charlotte's voice rose again, steady, stronger this time. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, deliberately using his formal title. "If he leaves, then so do I." The crowd gasped. William turned slowly toward her, disbelief written across his face. "Excuse me." Charlotte stepped closer, her chin lifted. "You taught me that family is everything, but this boy reminded me that heart means more than name or money. If you can't see that, then maybe you've forgotten what it means to love." The room was still again, all eyes shifting between father and daughter. For the first time that day, William Montgomery didn't have an answer, and as Eli stood on that stage beside the billionaire's daughter, the world finally stopped seeing a servant's child and started seeing something greater, the beginning of a miracle. The applause still lingered in the air like smoke, soft, fading, unforgettable. But for William Montgomery, it was not admiration he heard. It was defiance. He stood at the edge of the ballroom, his hand tightening around his glass of champagne. The music, that boy, his daughter's words, they had cracked something deep inside him, something he had buried long ago. To everyone else, William Montgomery was the image of success, the man who'd built his empire from dust, the name that meant power, precision, and perfection. But what no one knew, what he'd spent a lifetime hiding, was that he hadn't been born into wealth. He'd clawed his way up from the ground, and once he got there, he built walls, walls of marble and money, walls so high that no one could ever look down on him again. That night, after the guests had gone and the laughter had faded, William sat alone in his study. The room smelled faintly of old whiskey and mahogany, the scent of victories long past. He turned on the small lamp beside his desk. The golden light fell on an old photo frame that had long been turned face down. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he picked it up. A faded black and white photo stared back at him. A small house with peeling paint. In front of it, a barefoot boy grinned at the camera, a harmonica in his hand. The boy was him. He remembered that day clearly, even though it had been over 50 years. His father had been a janitor, his mother a seamstress. They couldn't afford a piano or violin, so his father had bought him a second-hand harmonica from a pawn shop. "Music," his father had said, "will keep you human when the world forgets you're one." But life had taught William something different, that being human meant being weak. So he had traded kindness for ambition and the harmonica for silence. Until tonight. Until that boy, Eli, had walked onto his stage and played the one sound he'd spent his entire life trying to forget. Meanwhile, across the estate, Maria Ward was sitting with her son in the servants' quarters. She had made him a small cup of hot milk from the kitchen and wrapped her shawl around his shoulders. "You were very brave today," she whispered. Eli shrugged. "I just wanted to help." Maria smiled softly. "You did more than help, baby. You reminded them that there's still heart in this house." But she saw the worry in his eyes. "That man, Mr. Montgomery, he was angry." Maria nodded. "He's a man who's forgotten what it means to feel small, but maybe your music helped him remember." Eli didn't understand fully, but her tone was gentle enough to make him believe it might be true. Back in his study, William leaned back in his chair, the old harmonica photo still in his hand. He could almost hear his father's voice again. "When you play, don't play for applause. Play to tell the truth." For years, he'd silenced that truth. He'd built an empire that couldn't be touched, but in the process, he'd lost the sound of his own soul. He exhaled heavily and set the photo down. Then, without really knowing why, he opened one of the drawers in his desk and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside it lay a dusty harmonica, nearly identical to Eli's. He hadn't touched it in decades. He lifted it, wiped the dust away, and pressed it to his lips. The first breath came out weak and trembling. But then, a sound, a fragile, quivering note that filled the quiet room. It wasn't beautiful, but it was real. He stopped, lowering the instrument. His chest felt tight, not with anger this time, but with something far more dangerous: regret. He turned his gaze toward the window. Outside, the garden lights flickered, and in the distance he could see the faint glow of the servants' quarters. For the first time he wondered what that boy was doing, and why the memory of his music wouldn't leave him alone. The next morning, the mansion buzzed again. The papers had already written about the miraculous moment at the Montgomery wedding, the maid's son who had saved the night. William read the headline in silence, his coffee untouched. From the shadows to the spotlight, the boy who played the wedding. Grace entered cautiously, clutching her clipboard. "Sir, the press is asking if they can feature the boy in the society pages. Human interest story, they say." William's jaw tightened. "No, I don't want any stories." Grace hesitated. "With respect, sir, people loved it. It made the family look warm." That word stung more than he expected. Warm. It was something he hadn't been called in years. "Find the mother," he said after a long pause. "I want to speak to her." Grace blinked. "Maria Ward?" "Yes. Bring her and the boy to my office." Grace nodded quickly, hiding her surprise. "Of course, Mr. Montgomery." When Maria and Eli arrived, they stood by the door, unsure of whether to step closer. William studied them for a long moment before speaking. "You shouldn't have interrupted the event yesterday." Maria's shoulders tensed. "I'm sorry, sir. He meant no harm." William raised a hand. "But you did something I didn't expect. You saved my daughter's wedding." Maria blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "I'd like to compensate you," he said stiffly, "for the trouble, for your son's performance." Eli shifted uncomfortably. "I don't want money," he said quietly. William looked at him, caught off guard. "Then what do you want?" Eli hesitated. "Just to play again. Maybe for people who'll listen." Something flickered in William's expression, something he couldn't name. He saw himself again in that boy's eyes, the same hunger, the same unspoken longing to be heard. Maria's hand gently touched Eli's shoulder. "He's just a child, sir. You don't have to." William interrupted softly. "Maybe I do." That night, as the house quieted again, William sat alone once more, the old harmonica resting on his desk beside the morning paper. The boy's words echoed in his mind. Just to play again, maybe for people who will listen. He turned the instrument over in his hands, feeling the cold metal press against his skin. For the first time in decades, the walls around him didn't feel like protection. They felt like a cage. And somewhere deep inside, the man who had spent a lifetime building those walls began to wonder if the boy who had broken through them could also help him tear them down. And as the billionaire sat alone, haunted by the sound of a forgotten harmonica, the man who once believed money could buy silence began to remember the one thing it could never buy: peace. The morning after their tense meeting, Maria Ward had expected silence, the kind of silence that usually followed when rich men wanted things forgotten. But instead, at precisely 8 o'clock, there was a soft knock at the servants' quarters. Grace Parker stood in the doorway, her usual sharpness softened into something almost hesitant. "Mrs. Ward," she said, "Mr. Montgomery would like to see you and your son again." In his study. Maria froze mid-step. Her first instinct was fear. "Why?" Grace hesitated. "He didn't say, only that it's personal." Eli looked up from the small wooden stool where he sat polishing his harmonica. His wide eyes found his mother's, silently asking for permission. Maria sighed, smoothing her apron. "All right," she said quietly. Let's go see what this man wants. They entered the grand study, its walls lined with shelves of leather-bound books no one seemed to read. The room smelled of cedar and faint whiskey. William Montgomery stood by the window, hands behind his back, gazing out over the sprawling gardens. When they entered, he didn't turn immediately. He spoke first, his voice calm but deliberate. "You grew up poor, didn't you, Mrs. Ward?" Maria stiffened. "Yes, sir, I did." He nodded slowly. "So did I." That alone startled her. She had never imagined a man like him saying such words. Not with that house, that voice, that power. William finally turned. "You see, I spent my life building walls high enough that no one could see where I came from. But last night, your son—" He paused, as if still trying to understand it himself. He broke through them. Eli shifted nervously beside his mother. William's expression softened slightly. That sound, what he played, it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that's something money can't buy anymore. Maria nodded slowly, unsure where he was going with this. He gestured to the two chairs across from his desk. "Please sit." They did. William sat down as well, folding his hands. "I've made a decision," he said, "and it involves both of you." Maria's fingers tightened around her son's hand. "Sir, with respect, if this is about money—" "It's not," William interrupted. "It's about opportunity." He leaned forward, his tone steady. "I want to sponsor your son's education. Proper schooling, with music training, conservatory level if he wishes. He has something rare, and I'd be a fool not to help him use it." Maria's eyes widened. "Music school?" Eli's heart skipped. "You mean, like real musicians go to?" William nodded. "Exactly like that." For a moment, the room felt lighter, but Maria's face remained cautious. "And why would you do that, sir?" she asked. William hesitated. "Because I remember what it's like to be that boy, to have a gift the world refuses to see." He looked at Eli, his voice lowering. "You reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago. My father once told me that music is the one thing that can make men equals. I think it's time I listened to him again." The sincerity in his voice was disarming. Maria wanted to believe it. But she'd lived too long in other people's houses not to know that every gift came with a price. "What would you want in return?" she asked carefully. William met her eyes. "Nothing. Just a promise. That he keeps playing, and that when the world hears him, they'll know where he came from." For a moment no one spoke. Eli's small fingers fidgeted with his harmonica. "Mama," he whispered, "I could learn for real. I could play better." Maria's heart ached. He sounded so hopeful, so alive. But fear tugged at her chest. "And if he changes his mind?" she asked. "If he decides he doesn't want this?" "Then he walks away," William said simply. "This isn't a contract. It's a door. Whether he steps through it or not, that's up to him." Maria studied him for a long moment. There was something new in his eyes, not the arrogance she'd always seen, but something fragile. Maybe guilt, maybe redemption. She took a deep breath. "Then we'll think about it." William nodded. "That's all I ask." He stood, offering his hand to Eli. "You did something extraordinary, young man. You reminded a room full of people what music sounds like when it comes from the heart. Don't ever lose that." Eli looked up at his mother, then hesitantly shook the man's hand. "Thank you, sir." William smiled faintly. "Call me Mr. Montgomery, for now." Later, as they walked back through the long corridor, Grace Parker caught up to them. "So," she said carefully, "did he offer what I think he offered?" Maria nodded. Grace exhaled, half laughing. "I've worked for that man for 12 years. I've never seen him do anything without an agenda. But this felt different." Maria smiled softly. Maybe the boy reminded him of who he used to be. Grace nodded. Then maybe that boy did more than save a wedding. That evening, after dinner, Maria and Eli sat outside their small quarters under the fading light. Fireflies flickered across the garden. Eli held the harmonica in his hands, turning it slowly. "Mama," he said softly, "do you think I should go to that school?" Maria looked at him, her eyes warm but unsure. "Baby, if your heart tells you to, then yes. But don't go because someone rich said you should. Go because it's what you were born to do." Eli nodded slowly, then lifted the harmonica to his lips. The melody that came out this time was different, freer, lighter, touched with something new, hope. As the music drifted through the night air, a light appeared in the distance. William Montgomery stood at his study window again, listening. He didn't call out, didn't interrupt. He just listened to the sound of a boy's harmonica, the song that now belonged to both of them. And as the night carried Eli's music through the estate, two hearts, one hardened by pride, one guided by innocence, found themselves connected by a sound that asked for nothing but truth. 2 weeks passed since the wedding, but the echoes of that day refused to fade. Eli's name had begun to travel far beyond the walls of the Montgomery estate. A few guests, touched by his performance, had shared videos online. One of them, shaky, recorded on a phone, captured the exact moment the boy raised his harmonica and filled the air with that trembling, beautiful melody. By the third day, it had millions of views. The title read, "The Maid's Son Who Saved a Billionaire's Wedding." For Maria Ward, it was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, people she'd never met sent letters to the estate. Kind words, small gifts, even harmonicas for Eli. But for every kind stranger, there were others who came with greed, gossip, and cameras. By the fifth morning, journalists were camped outside the gates. They shouted questions as Maria tried to walk Eli to the car that had been sent to take him to his first day of music lessons. "Maria, is it true Mr. Montgomery's adopting your son?" "Eli, how does it feel to be a millionaire's prodigy? Do you think the billionaire's using you for publicity?" Maria didn't answer. She held Eli's hand tighter and kept her head down. Inside the car, Eli looked up at her. "Mama, why are they saying that? Mr. Montgomery isn't bad." Maria forced a smile. "People talk, baby. That's what they do when they see something good. They try to turn it into something else." But her voice trembled, because deep down, she wasn't entirely sure. That afternoon, while Eli attended his first formal lesson at a nearby conservatory, Maria sat in the back of the classroom, quietly observing. The teacher, Mr. Leon, was patient but firm, an old jazz musician with kind eyes and calloused hands. He treated Eli not like a child from the servants' quarters, but like any other student. When the boy played, the man simply closed his eyes and nodded. "That's feeling," he murmured. "That's something you can't teach." Maria's heart swelled, but even in her pride, she couldn't ignore the faint unease that lingered. Why was Mr. Montgomery doing this? Was it guilt, redemption, or something else entirely? Something to make himself look good in the public eye? Back at the mansion, William sat in his office, staring at the mountain of messages piling up on his desk. Emails from reporters, invitations to speak at charity events, a dozen corporate partners praising his generosity. He hadn't meant for this to become a spectacle. At least, that's what he told himself. But when his assistant mentioned that public sentiment toward the Montgomery name had improved by 20% since the boy's story went viral, he didn't dismiss it either. He simply nodded. "Good," he said. "But we're not doing interviews." Still, when he leaned back in his chair, something gnawed at him. The uncomfortable truth that maybe Maria's suspicion wasn't entirely misplaced. That night, Maria found herself summoned again. The invitation wasn't written. It came through Grace Parker, who looked more anxious than usual. "He wants to see you in the music room," she said quietly. Maria's chest tightened. "Is something wrong?" Grace hesitated. "I don't think so. But he's not himself lately." When Maria arrived, she found William sitting beside the grand piano, the same harmonica he'd found in his drawer resting on the bench beside him. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit," he said softly. She did, cautious. He spoke without turning. I didn't expect the world to care about that boy. But now that they do, I can't decide if I'm proud or ashamed. Maria frowned. Ashamed of what, sir? He sighed. Of the fact that I spent my life trying to be seen. And now it takes a boy with nothing to make people see me differently. Maria tilted her head. You gave him a chance, Mr. Montgomery. Maybe that's enough. He turned then, his expression raw. And what if it isn't? What if this is just another thing I'm taking from someone else? Their story, their light. Maria hesitated. Are you? The question hung in the air. William looked down at his hands. I don't know anymore. The next morning, the press found new fuel. A gossip column published an article suggesting that the Montgomery family planned to use Eli's story to rebrand their empire as philanthropic. It included photos of Maria and Eli entering the mansion, a narrative spun to make it seem like charity, not compassion. By noon, reporters surrounded the music school. Eli didn't understand why his lessons were canceled that day. Mama, did I do something wrong? He asked, his small hands gripping the harmonica tight. Maria knelt in front of him, tears in her eyes. No, baby, you did everything right. It's the world that doesn't know how to see goodness without breaking it first. She stood, heart pounding. We're leaving, at least until this storm passes. She went to pack their things. That evening, William returned to find the servants' quarters empty. Grace handed him a note, her eyes uncertain. It was short, only one sentence. Thank you for everything, sir. But my boy belongs to his music, not your world. Maria Ward. He folded the note slowly, staring at the paper as if it were heavier than steel. Then he looked at the harmonica on his desk. And for the first time since his empire had begun, William Montgomery realized that money could open doors, but only truth could keep them from closing again. He made a decision. The next morning, without his assistant, without his driver, he left the estate. He drove himself through the crowded streets until he reached a modest neighborhood on the edge of the city, the place where Maria and Eli had gone. He found them sitting on a park bench. Eli was playing softly, the harmonica's sound floating through the morning air, simple and pure. Children stopped to listen. William approached quietly. Maria looked up, startled. Mr. Montgomery? He took a breath, his voice steady but humbled. I didn't come to bring you back. I came to say you were right. She frowned. About what? He smiled sadly. That your boy doesn't belong to my world, but I was wrong to think my world couldn't belong to him. Eli looked up, his harmonica still in his hand. William crouched down, meeting the boy's eyes. Play again, he said softly. Not for me. For yourself. Let them hear you. Eli hesitated, then lifted the harmonica to his lips. As the notes filled the park, William closed his eyes. For once, he didn't care who was watching, who was filming, or what headlines would follow. He just listened. And as the city listened to the song of a boy who had nothing, the man who once had everything finally understood that the truest kind of wealth isn't measured in what you build, but in what you're willing to give back. The morning after that quiet performance in the park, something remarkable happened. Someone had filmed Eli's song. Not the one from the wedding, but the one he played for no one but himself. The video spread faster than anyone could have imagined. But this time, it wasn't gossip. It was grace. The caption read, "He plays like the world forgot to listen." Within hours, millions watched a 12-year-old boy playing a weathered harmonica on a cracked city bench, while an old billionaire sat beside him with his eyes closed. Not as master and servant, but as equals. Across towns and cities, people began to share the clip. Musicians covered his melody. Choirs rewrote it into hymns. A jazz band in New Orleans recorded their own version and called it "the song that changed everything." And for once, it wasn't fame that found Eli. It was connection. He had played no words, no lyrics, yet his song spoke to everyone who had ever felt unseen. Back at the Montgomery estate, reporters waited again, but this time not for scandal. They wanted to talk about forgiveness, about second chances, about how something so small could reach so far. William Montgomery, the man who had once built his life behind walls, didn't run from the cameras this time. He stood in front of them, his voice calm and humbled. "I didn't make this story," he said. "A boy did. One who reminded me that music isn't about perfection. It's about truth. He didn't play for power. He played for love. And I think that's something we all needed to remember." The crowd applauded. But Maria, watching from the side, noticed that his words were not rehearsed. They came from a place that finally sounded real. Weeks turned into months. Eli began performing in small community events, always with his mother nearby. His songs carried something rare, innocence wrapped in wisdom. People didn't just listen, they felt. Then one evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, William Montgomery called Maria and Eli to the estate one last time. When they arrived, the grand ballroom, the same place that had once silenced him, looked different. Gone were the chandeliers and champagne tables. In their place sat rows of chairs filled with children, families, neighbors. No tuxedos, no gold, just people. A small sign at the entrance read, "The Harmony Project, free music for every child." Maria stopped in her tracks, her hand covering her mouth. "Mr. Montgomery, what is this?" He smiled gently. "A new start. A school, for anyone who wants to learn, no matter where they come from. Your son inspired it. I thought it was time my house stopped being a monument and started being a bridge." Eli's eyes lit up. "A music school?" William nodded. "Named after the first song that changed me, and maybe the world." He gestured toward the stage. "Would you open it for us?" Eli looked at his mother. She nodded, her eyes brimming with pride. He stepped forward, the same harmonica in his hand, worn, dented, familiar. When he played, the notes danced across the hall like sunlight over water. Every sound carried something that words never could. Gratitude, forgiveness, freedom. Even William's eyes shimmered. He wasn't ashamed to let a single tear fall. As the final note faded, the room rose in applause, but not the kind born from showmanship. It was quiet at first, reverent, like a prayer. Maria wrapped her arms around her son. "You did it, baby," she whispered. "You turned your song into something the world could believe in." Eli smiled. "No, Mama, we did." That night, as the guests left and the lights dimmed, William found himself alone in the garden where it had all begun. He looked up at the sky, at the same stars that had once watched him build his empire, and for the first time, he didn't feel alone. From somewhere inside the mansion, he heard the faint sound of Eli's harmonica again, soft, joyful, untamed. He smiled to himself. "Keep playing, son," he whispered to the night. "Don't ever stop." Years later, the Harmony Project became a national program. Children from every walk of life, rich, poor, known, forgotten, learned to play together. At every opening ceremony, they began with the same melody, Eli's song. And somewhere, in every note, lingered the echo of that first moment. The sound of a boy brave enough to play when no one believed he should, and a man humble enough to listen when he finally did. And so, a melody born in silence grew into something the world would never forget. A song that didn't just change a wedding or a man's heart, but reminded us all that the smallest voice, when played with truth, can carry the farthest. In the end, it wasn't the mansion, the money, or the grand celebration that people remembered. It was a boy with a harmonica and the courage to play when the world least expected it. Eli's song became more than music. It became a bridge between pride and humility, between silence and truth, between a man who had forgotten where he came from and a child who reminded him what truly matters. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that the smallest voices can still create the biggest echoes. Because here at Tales That Travel, every note, every tear, every story travels farther than we think.